The engineer who vanished, the only proof of a physics-defying alien alloy. The van was already idling at the end of the cul-de-sac when the doorbell camera froze. His front door hung open, coffee steaming on the counter, safe pried like a jaw, one slot empty, a single page on the desk. If I disappear, it's because of the alloy. The house alarm pinged, then the feed went black. 36 hours earlier, he'd slid us a ring box with a fleck inside and a protocol written like a dare. He was a cleared aerospace engineer with access to crash retrieval material. The alloy didn't behave under known physics. To see how this started, we go back to his first night with it. The first encounter with the alloy. He wasn't scheduled. A midnight call from a number he recognized but never saved told him to report to the offsite bay. He kissed his sleeping kid's head, texted his wife he'd be late, and drove without the radio. The badge readers clicked in sequence, gate, inner corridor with painted stripes, then the caged room that always felt a few degrees too cold. On the bench sat a crate with a code that matched nothing he'd seen. Not a project name, just letters that meant deniability. He knew the rule measured, don't interpret. The test tech, a quiet guy with coffee breath and a checklist, signed out a small ingot and slid it across like it might slide back. Brushed gray, thumb-sized, stamped with a microdot lot number. He lifted it and frowned. The mass didn't match the feel. Not heavy, not light, just wrong in a way his hands recognized before instruments did. Baseline first, weigh-in, micrometer, ambient temperature. The first oddity arrived as a wobble in the balance output that smoothed when he touched the frame. He logged it and blamed airflow. Then the accelerometer trace quivered around zero with no input. The tech tapped the bench, it calmed, then returned like a heartbeat you could only see. He recalibrated. The system passed. The oscillation stayed. Instrument error, the tech said, the phrase they used when numbers refused to sit still. He sent a snapshot to the secure server. 10 minutes later, a reply from a supervisor who never messaged at night. Stop interpreting, keep collecting, subtext clear. He took a breath and kept going. He started a controlled RF sweep with a shielded loop, nothing exotic. Under field, density readings drifted. Not thermal creep, not a scale quirk. The acceleration profile refused to line up with implied mass. He ran a simple pendulum because pendulums keep you honest. Periods shifted under exposure. A whisper of power, a few microtesla, and the numbers stepped past uncertainty and held. Swap rigs, the tech said they did. The shift remained. Room temperature stable, EMI checked, field off, period crept back, on drifted away again. He didn't write inertia. He wrote period variance correlated with RF, then bolded it. Meanwhile, a data logger timestamp blinked and a camera pointed at a meter caught a tiny quiver he'd later memorize. He set up a micro drop. A needle released a steel bead onto the ingot over a force transducer. The impulse should have spiked then decayed. Instead, the peak flattened. Energy went somewhere he couldn't name. Not zero transfer, near enough to ruin lunch. Control coupon, aluminum, same geometry. Textbook spike. Back to the ingot, flattened again. New transducer, same. The tech forced a smile. Metamaterial, he muttered, as if a category could cage it. The word felt like a blanket over a moving dog. Thermal next, because the schedule was the schedule. Thermocouple on the ingot, controlled heat flux. The thermometer climbed slower than it should, then found a shelf. The ambient probe ticked down by a whisper, like heat was leaking sideways into a place the probe didn't measure. Cold shock, no squeal, no crackle. The ingot sat like a patient. He wrote the report like someone walking a narrow path in the dark. Observations only. No claims, traces, photos of meter faces, pendulum periods, drop curves. He flagged energy accounting discrepancy without writing second law. He hit send. Review came back with sections redacted, pendulum graph cropped at the y-axis where the drift was clearest. His stomach sank in that quiet way that never makes it to a complaint box. He asked for guidance. Keep collecting, the supervisor said. Interpretation at the appropriate level. The appropriate level lived above his head, behind doors with readers he'd never touch. He kept collecting. Small variations turned consistent. RF coupling behaved like a mood, sensitive to bands that shouldn't matter. He ran out of ways to apologize to the data without lying. Unknown to him, this wasn't their first crate. He suspected when the tech pulled a fresh ingot with the same non-standard code and identical dot pattern. Two samples should have given solace. Instead, they harmonized. Oscillations lined up like a song you don't want stuck in your head. At 4 a.m., he sat in his driveway and watched the porch light breathe. Hands on the wheel, engine ticking, world normal. Inside, he set his badge on the counter next to a PTA note and knew the lines had moved. The next night, he'd bring a used camcorder in his trunk and a new rule. If the system wouldn't remember, he would. He stripped the pendulum to bones, new filament, knife edge, damping cup, isolated table. Baseline nailed his model, alloy in the bob, RF up slowly. Period lengthened, clean and monotonic. Off it crept back, on out again. A dimmer on inertia, he thought, then wrote effective inertia proxy shift to keep his job. He reran the microdrop with an optical gate. The bead's deceleration curve went uncanny, softened slope, a long tail that didn't fit elastic or plastic. He plotted residuals until his eyes blurred and underlined near zero instantaneous transfer twice. Then he touched heat again, core lagged, plateaued, air probe dipped a tenth. He crossed out non-local in his notes and left the blank. He didn't need enemies made of adjectives. The room hummed, he switched RF mid-swing. The oscilloscope re-triggered with a hiccup. The camera timecode stuttered a frame. The text watch flashed noon. They stood quiet. He filed an incident note and added a line he'd never written, concurrent electronic disruptions. He printed a copy and slid a photo of the pendulum into his pocket. If the system wouldn't be the record, he'd become the record. And if this held, the world he trusted had a seam running right through it. The earlier crash and the silent program. 3 years before the crate with the wrong code showed up on his bench, a convoy crossed a desert at dusk with its lights dead and its radios clipped to yes or no. He wasn't there. He found it later in the paperwork, purchase orders that didn't name parts, invoices that used a codename on paper but never on a whiteboard, fuel receipts that traced a rectangle around a dry lake bed, nobody filed as a destination. The shell contractor's address led to a brick lobby with a keypad and a receptionist who never picked up. On their website, they did specialty ceramics and RF housings. Off the site, they moved whatever the horizon coughed up into rooms like his. The program lived in whispers and in acronyms that changed faster than printers. Compartmentalization wasn't a policy, it was a mood. He logged tests under a code that vanished by Monday, replaced on the same door by a friendlier set of letters that meant nothing. The metal on his bench was always a slice, square edges, brushed faces, never a shape that told a story. He saw numbers, not objects. Someone else saw objects, not numbers. That was the design. Break the picture so no single pair of hands could hold it. Rumor filled the gaps like expanding foam. In a cafeteria where the microwaves hummed and voices died against acoustic tiles, a range officer mentioned a panel that knit shut under a heat lamp, then laughed so he wouldn't have to defend it. A machinist swore he'd squared a coupon from a curve that had no center. A young engineer tried on a big word, non-orthogonal, like a jacket, and didn't notice it didn't fit. Most of it sounded like posture. Enough of it had the smoothness of a rehearsed lie. He tried the front door with security and got the sentence that sets edges. You're here to measure, not to understand. It wasn't a threat, it was a boundary. Understanding lived at a level with its own air. His badge carried weight better than most, but there were stripes he'd never cross. Doors at the end of hallways didn't even beep when he stood near them. They just didn't exist for him. Meanwhile, the ledger told a story in tiny fonts. Burn rates spiked without headcount. Impact attenuation fixtures appeared next to cryot-rated thermocouples and RF absorbers. The codename echoed across 6 vendors, never inside a lab note. He'd seen the pattern on other projects he'd orbited, deniability as architecture. Every purchase looked harmless alone. Together, they built a thing nobody was allowed to name. Get this, when a new hire tried to track where the earlier recovery had gone, he was told the contractor had been acquired and the records were in transition. The acquiring company didn't have a website, just a K Street mailbox and a list of clients nobody could see. The sealed crates that arrived after that transition had tamper tape in a font he only saw on government forms. He peeled one and stuck it on his notebook like a joke that wouldn't age well. What nobody knew in those first months, at least nobody he could find, was how long the desert story had been on repeat. Old-timers dropped dates from the late 199s like pocket change. A phone tree spun up when weather turned bad in New Mexico. Satellite time got booked under A/B campaigns that never touched journals. He decided half of it was theater, the other half a script rewritten to remove guilt. Here's where the mood bent. The program's rule was simple: publish nothing, question less. It wasn't painted on a wall, it lived in red ink. He filed anomaly reports and watched verbs become nouns. Inertia drift turned into effective mass characteristics. Heat leak into thermal management artifact. His pendulum graphs came back with axes reset to friendlier ranges. He kept the originals under graphite smudges in his notebook with dates that matched badge logs. He adapted the way people do when they still need paychecks and health insurance. He narrowed questions until they slid through review. He learned who liked margins wide and who liked them tight enough to choke. He stopped asking about the object and talked to his rigs, load cells, pendulums, bell jars. A good test is a shelter. He crawled under shelters and pretended the weather outside was normal. Unknown to them across town, another lab was chewing different slices. He learned it by accident. A courier dropped a Pelican case at his cage with a packing list that mentioned a frequency band his room wasn't cleared to sweep. He documented the mistake and sent it back. 2 days later, a memo arrived about cross-facility synchronization and harmonized methods. words that sound like teamwork and feel like doors closing. The crash itself only showed up in fragments. A range tech had seen a curved interior that doubled as an exterior, no seam to chase. A contractor described tire tracks that circled a patch of graded earth like a dog before it lies down. A pilot drank too much at a wedding and said he'd flown a pattern over a box he wasn't supposed to know, then caught himself and changed the subject to weather. None of it made a report. All of it left fingerprints on purchase cards and gas receipts. He started keeping a private timeline, convoy sightings, acquisition dates, CCs that suddenly included new names with no bios, instrument orders that didn't match declared capability. The line moved from recovery to lab to range. The moment it shifted from artifact to capability, you could feel in the nouns. Drawings went from coupons to panels. Queries asked about force attenuation under short dwell. Then came a phrase that didn't belong outside a paperback and yet lived on a slide: inertial dampening concepts. He knew what that meant. The desert had given them something that dented rules, and the machine had reshaped it into tasks with due dates. Understanding would be optional. Use would be mandatory. He wasn't against utility. He was against a truth paced out by people who didn't have to hold the rig when the camera stuttered. While he ran pendulums and refused to write nouns that made enemies, the program matured into a silence that enforced itself. Badges hesitated, friends waved from farther away. Supervisors used phrases that rolled like marbles: appropriate oversight, aligned processes, risk accepted at the correct level. The crash that nobody admitted left a trail nobody could miss if they knew how to read. He read it and felt the temperature drop. The alloy on his bench had a past. The program had a future. He'd been placed at the hinge and told not to look up. He looked anyway, and that was the beginning of trouble. The impossible property reveals itself. He chased repeatable, not miracles, so he stripped the setup until it was just truth and string. Fresh graphite fiber, new knife edge, damping cup topped with glycerin to kill swagger. He ran baseline for an hour, long period swings until the average stopped arguing. Then he clipped the alloy into the bob with a paper carrier, no metal fasteners, and slid a pocket radio near the enclosure. Antenna looped, volume down, static tuned to a dead band so nobody could say he'd hidden a signal in a song. The first nudge felt like a dare. Period out by a fraction, clean beyond his noise. He killed the radio. Period crept back like a cat returning to a path, on again, out again. He mapped across the dial by ear, pencil marks where the hiss shifted, and found something he didn't like. A shallow valley where nothing much happened, then a peak where the swing went lazy as if the world's push had been sanded. He wrote effective inertia proxy shift and underlined proxy. Stakes lived in what that word protected. If weight and acceleration parted ways under an external field, the bedrock he taught interns in a break room had a crack. He didn't write crack, he wrote drift, then he tried to kill it. Brass bob, no response. Aluminum carrier with no fleck, flat as a chalkboard. Alloy back in, the laziness returned. He moved the radio a foot, then a meter. The effect fell off with distance, not like inverse square, not like anything polite, more like a shape he couldn't see. He attacked impulse next. The microhammer he'd built from a watch spring and a foil switch slapped a tiny steel bead onto the fleck sitting over a paize. Control first, steel on steel, sharp spike, quick decay. Fleck in path, peak flattened, the time under the curve stretched like the punch had to pass through honey to reach the sensor. He flipped order, swapped springs, rotated the mount, cursed once when the foil tore and rebuilt it. The attenuation followed the fleck around the rig like a shadow that knew his schedule. Meanwhile, he added a second accelerometer on the bead itself to spy on the moment of contact. The deceleration slope softened on approach, then took its time in a tail that refused to fit elastic or plastic models. He tried to wedge it into a viscoelastic frame and the residuals laughed. He didn't write laugh. He wrote non-Maxwellian tail, near zero instantaneous transfer, extended impulse duration. Then he looked at near zero long enough to feel superstitious and added, within resolution. Heat next because heat makes liars. He stuck a micro thermistor to the fleck with a dab of grease and taped another in the air an inch away. He fed a gentle step with a copper plate warmed by a tea candle. The core temperature lagged expectation, then found a shelf and loitered, the curve flattening like it had discovered a rule book he didn't own. The air probe dipped a tenth for a handful of seconds. In still air, with gradients he could draw in chalk, the dip didn't have a friend. He chilled it with an upside-down duster puff and watched the drop pause on a ledge before resuming. He wrote apparent thermal staging because non-local put a target on your back. The room pushed back. He switched the radio band mid-swing to see if he could jerk the period, and every instrument winced. The scope re-triggered late. The camera timecode skipped one frame and then apologized by catching up. The tech's watch blinked noon and returned to being a watch. He wrote an incident note with the calm of a person who knows calm is armor. Field band transition correlated with multi-instrument hiccups. He pivoted to geometry. What if it wasn't mass but shape? He changed the pendulum length. The shift persisted, scaled like a personality trait. He rotated the fleck in the carrier 90 degrees, no change. He sandwiched a dielectric film between the fleck and the paper to see if contact mattered. It didn't care. He moved the radio outside the room and ran coax through the door to avoid stray coupling to benches. The peak bands stayed peak bands. He penciled a rough coupling map, distance, band, amplitude, and drew a ring where bad things started happening to electronics. To make sure the room wasn't lying, he borrowed a torsion balance from a calibration bay that didn't loan equipment. He didn't borrow, he begged. Old brass beam, mirror, laser pointer from a lecture kit. Baseline twist, flicker of light on a ruler across the room. With the fleck on a pan and the radio sighing static, the torsion period stretched a whisper, then two. He killed the field. The light walked home. He toggled. The walk repeated. When a 19th century rig agrees with a 21st century headache, you stop blaming firmware. Meanwhile, he tried a nitrogen purge under a clear tub to strip convection and humidity out of the equation. The pendulum shift didn't care about weather. The drop tail didn't care about air's gossip. The thermal shelf kept its seat. He wrote, persisted under reduced convection, humidity 22%, and felt the floor drop a centimeter. He brought in a skeptic, the tech from another bay who hated magic and loved calibration stickers. He said, watch my hands. The tech watched the period drift, the radio click bands, the impulse flat, the timecode flinch. He didn't say metamaterial, he didn't say ghost, he said, do it again. They did 3 times. On the way out, the tech said, you know what they'll want. He didn't mean understanding. Impact arrived as a knock disguised as a memo. Layered samples requested, thin stacks, dielectric films, threaded backers, short dwell characterization needed on a panel the size of a door. The nouns had changed, his notes hadn't. He wrote one line to himself in the margin of a page where the pendulum periods lived. The effect is real enough for procurement. He didn't cheer, he checked the batteries on the camera, replaced the watch spring, and drew a box around the bands that made electronics stutter. He added a sentence under it in block letters, no humans in the halo. Then he put his pencil down and realized his hands were shaking, not from fear of being wrong, but from fear of being right where the system was already headed. The private archive and the quiet decision. He found the camcorder in a storage unit that smelled like old weddings and mothballs. Cash only, no paperwork, a strap that held someone else's sweat. He told himself it was for clarity, not insurance. Back home, he cleared a corner of the garage and laid out a new ritual. Composition notebooks with marbled covers, a date box on every page, pens that didn't smear, and tape that didn't yellow. If the system wouldn't remember, he would. He started with photographs, meter faces straight on, no angles that could be called dramatic, glare tamed with a lampshade, timestamps in frame that matched the camcorder clock. He whispered readings aloud while the pendulum swung so the audio carried truth the graphs might later lose. He wrote deltas by hand, period shifts, impulse tails, thermal shelves. He drew the room on the first page of each session, table, radio, cable route, where the chair sat, because a changed chair can move a number, and he needed to fight future doubt with present detail. He kept the recordings analog at first. SD cards stayed in a tin under screws in an old tackle box. Screenshots were printed on a failing inkjet and labeled with a blunt pencil. He tracked instrument serial numbers and calibration stickers like license plates, logged room temperature, humidity, and the brand of tape he used to keep a wire obedient. He wasn't hoarding secrets. He was hoarding context, because context is what redactions kill first. He told no one, not his wife, who noticed the smell of solder and asked if he was fixing the lamp, not his friend in avionics, who listened too closely and asked the right, wrong question. Silence was the only thing that couldn't be subpoenaed. The closest he came to breaking it was a sentence to a colleague in the parking lot: the pendulum won't stop lying. The colleague stared at his shoes and said, then stop asking it questions, and smiled like it was a joke that could keep them safe. His life split into neat halves: PTA meetings with cupcakes and folding chairs, then nights with a bell jar he couldn't sign out and a pocket radio tuned by ear. He clapped for a kid's goal, cheered, and scanned the sidelines for faces that didn't belong. He felt ridiculous, then less so, then not at all. He returned to a budget review, nodded through headcount slides, and stayed late to watch a timecode blink wrong. Masks switched fast. He got good at it in a way that made him hate the skill. He set rules because rules make fear manageable. He wouldn't export raw files, only photographs of screens. He'd keep chain of custody on paper for anything that left the building: date, time, initials. He'd never name names, only shapes and initials he could swap later. He'd encrypt the home archive with a passphrase he could type under stress but never write down. He'd split storage into 3, one set of notebooks in a weatherproof bag inside a bin labeled camping gear, a second set scanned to a drive that never touched a network, and an index printed on paper and mailed to a P.O. box 2 towns over like a hobbyist's catalog. Micro-stories drifted in. One afternoon, frosting a volcano for a fourth-grade science night, he got a calendar change. His lab block moved, no reason. He wiped chocolate from his thumb, typed OK, and tried not to taste metal. Another night, he woke at 3 a.m., went to the kitchen, and found the camcorder on the table where he hadn't left it. He stood for a full minute before remembering he'd moved it half asleep to charge. He laughed once quietly, then didn't again. Above him, the weather changed. New CCs appeared on memos. The procurement code vanished from the label generator and returned with friendlier letters. The tech who'd watched the timecode skip got reassigned to ballistics for cross-training. A liaison with a haircut that told the truth started asking about force attenuation under short dwell and directional bias. The nouns around him pivoted from artifact to capability. He felt the floor tilt. He hardened his archive. He added witness marks to pages, small diagonal lines across corners that only his pencils could recreate. He photographed his own handwriting with the camcorder rolling so the date would be burned into magnetic tape. He taped a thread to the notebook's spines and clipped it under the workbench. A break would mean a visit while he slept. He removed the fleck from the lab only in memory. The ring box at home held nothing but air and plans. Then he made the quiet decision that felt like stepping off a curb in the dark. He'd keep doing the job by the book, and he'd keep a parallel book the system couldn't sanitize. He'd write methods like recipes a stranger could follow, string length, bob mass, radio position, bands by ear where static changed flavor. He'd write failure, 2 runs that fell into noise, days humidity 1, times the spring grew tired and lied. He'd mail the index to himself every month, certified, sealed, unopened, a timestamp the machine couldn't edit. He chose one confidant on paper, not in person, a professor's name in a sealed envelope with a sentence that would only make sense if everything else failed. He chose one journalist in pencil on a page he'd later tear out. He wrote a line at the bottom of the first notebook's last page. If the system forgets, this remembers. He closed it, felt the weight, and found he'd grown heavier too. That night he walked the house with the lights off, counting steps between window and door. He sat at the kitchen table, the ring box in his palm like a prop in a play he didn't audition for, and accepted the shape of the next move. Documentation had become defiance. The archive wasn't backup anymore. It was a fuse. He decided when to light it would be his choice, not theirs. The program pivots, military applications begin. They arrived without ceremony, 2 men and a woman with government lanyards that didn't name an agency, only authority. They didn't ask about pendulums. They asked about force attenuation under short dwell, repeatability windows, and whether the flattening could be induced on a timetable. The tech glanced at him. This is the fork. The questions were why. They were how fast, how often, how safe for a body. Stakes shifted the second they said soldier survivability. He pictured a vest catching a blast and keeping a heartbeat steady. He also pictured the moment the camera timecode flinched and the watch blinked noon. If it mutes a punch, one liaison offered, we can save faces and spines. He heard the second half unsaid. If you can mute a punch, you can hide one. Action came as drawings and requisitions. Layered coupons, alloy dielectric, alloy ceramic backer, threaded inserts. Fixture scaled up, drop tower turned shoulder rig. Ballistic gelatin calibrated with BBs and charts. High-speed cameras booked with a strobe schedule tight enough to shave eyebrows. He filed the requests and watched the noun artifact get replaced by panel and module. The first armor trial felt like a rehearsal for a verdict. Door-sized plate, nested loops behind the alloy, bands tuned to where his pendulum had gone lazy and the impulse tail stretched. Projectile hit with an ugly bloom and died in the front layers. The gel behind dimpled shallow. The footage slowed a winning hit into a ripple that never reached the backer. Someone took off their earmuffs and said, "That's not how steel does it," with a laugh that let everyone exhale. He didn't. Impact followed in memos. Inertial management concepts for aircrew protection appeared between part numbers and shipping dates. He reread the phrase. He refused to write inertia in his notes. Here it was on a slide. He wrote quietly in his book, "They're going to put it near a cockpit." Meanwhile, the liaisons brought scenarios. Seat pans and helicopters, plates under floorboards, helmet loops shaped like a halo. Can we pulse it? Can we bias it forward? What's the halo radius for safe dwell? He answered with the only honest word, unknown. They drew anyway. He pointed to bands to avoid and bands that woke the effect. They wanted dials. He had knobs that squeaked. Stakes rose with requests for longer dwell, human proximate. He asked for a safety review. The liaison smiled the phrase, aligned oversight. He asked who owned no-go. The answer used the word distributed. He recognized the shape. No one owns red. Action tightened on the range. They built a sled, a gel thorax, and a panel you could bolt on with a wrench. Low dwell first, the panel sang that subaudible song your chest feels. The gel bruised less. The medic on the clipboard nodded at clean vitals and wrote in small letters. He wrote home with the tech in silence. If it works, the tech said, someone signs for it and didn't add the rest, and someone else pays later. In the lab, new forms arrived with new people. Human factors exposure checklist, columns for EEG deviations, M susceptibility thresholds, pacemaker exclusion zones. He asked whether a safety board existed by name. We're aligned with appropriate oversight. He logged the sentence to remind himself what vagueness sounds like. Impact landed inside the building. A neighbor bay tech started wearing a hat indoors because the lights felt loud. An older engineer repeated a word like it had a loose tooth. The liaison asked if electronics hiccups persisted with shielding. He said he hadn't been cleared to test that. Prioritize it, the liaison wrote, as if authorization and physics were synonyms. Meanwhile, a schedule slide linked the future. Phase 0 flight characterization. He raised a hand. The coupling bands weren't mapped enough to sit near avionics. The reply used isolation strategies and moved on. He wrote "Don't fly the halo" on a sticky note and hid it in his notebook. They pushed directionality. Could the effect be stronger forward than back? He built a crude phased loop set because it was the only thing they'd let him build. The pendulum didn't care about his arrows. The impulse tail didn't face the way they wanted. He said so. They wrote "limited directionality, further study," and asked for the next panel anyway. Stakes turned explicit when a request arrived for sensor payloads co-located with biological proxies. He tasted metal and wrote a formal recommendation: pause human proximate runs until the halo was characterized independently. The answer was a familiar shape: no causal link established, continue under mitigations. He stared at the period on that sentence like it had blood on it. Action narrowed to 2 moves. He did the tests right: clean rigs, honest logs, bands circled in pencil where the room twitched. And he hardened the archive: chain of custody for panels, timestamped gel photos, witness signatures on range cards. He wrote "no humans in Halo" in 3 places and underlined it twice. Impact came as vocabulary hardening. Inertial management subsystem replaced concept on a slide stamped with an eagle. Timelines shortened. Ship dates appeared. He was asked if he could commit to a band that doubled the pendulum shift. He said the word none of them liked: maybe. Meanwhile, he saw the cost ledger begin to fill in small numbers, headaches in clusters on long dwell days, a clock that skipped on the wall and then apologized, a pacemaker advisory pinned to a cork board and then unpinned. He tried to buy time with rigor. The program bought time with speed. He went home and wrote a sentence the way you write to your future self when you might not get another chance. The pivot has happened. Understanding optional, capability mandatory. Then he shut the notebook, set the pencil down, and realized the next request would put a person inside the halo again, and this time the camera wouldn't be the only thing that stuttered. The first human consequence. They booked the range like it was any other Wednesday: clipboards, cones, a medic who looked more bored than worried. He argued to wait, map the halo first, but the slide deck had shipped dates now. The door-sized panel hummed at the bands his pendulum hated, loops nested behind alloy, tuner riding right up to the edge of where electronics twitched. The volunteer was a young contractor with gym shoulders and a grin for a photo nobody would admit existed. Stakes walked out wearing safety glasses and a borrowed vest. The medic taped EKG leads to a chest that didn't look nervous and asked him to count backward from 100. He breezed it. Clipboard boxes filled, baseline vitals steady, no pacemaker, consent signed on a line that didn't list time feels wrong as a risk. The liaison initialed the test card like the ink itself made it safe. Low dwell first, the loop sang that subaudible note your ribcage hears before your ears do. The pneumatic launcher sent a projectile at the plate. It hit and bloomed into a flower of metal that died in the front layer. The gel behind barely sighed. The high-speed replay looked like physics being kind. He marked the curve in his head and felt no triumph. The camera tally light didn't blink. The wall clock didn't skip. He looked at the volunteer's face. Calm. They stepped power, dwell extended. Mid-countdown, the volunteer lifted a hand. Wait, he said, swallowing, head rush. The medic checked the monitor, then his eyes. Describe it, he frowned. Like I moved fast but stayed still, like the world lagged a beat. The liaison asked if he wanted to continue. Pride answered before wisdom. He nodded. The second shot hit, the gel stayed polite. Impact arrived after the hum died. The volunteer leaned on the table and closed his eyes. Nausea, he said, and stretchy time. He tried to laugh and failed. The medic's numbers stayed inside lines. The log captured subjective vertigo, no objective correlates. Boxes got checks. On the drive back, nobody turned on the radio. Air felt thick. We did that, the tech said, not bragging. Meanwhile, the room got petty. A handheld meter froze on a value and stayed frozen until its battery came out. The data logger rebooted to a date from years before the volunteer was born. His watch vibrated twice and flashed noon. He added a line to a card he kept for himself. Hiccups clustered at band edges. He was told to stick to results, not poetry. Back at the lab, he filed a recommendation: stand down human proximate runs until the halo radius was mapped independently. He called it a coupling halo because he needed a name to pin to the problem. The answer landed fast and smooth, no causal link established, continue under mitigations, rotate shifts. An observer from medical would be added, as if a witness could absorb risk. Stakes cut closer when small things stacked. On long dwell days, headaches arrived in bunches. An older engineer missed a word mid-sentence and then missed the laugh after. The junior tech left sticky notes on a rig he could assemble blind. The wall clock jumped forward a second like it had tripped. The pacemaker advisory appeared on a corkboard, then disappeared. He started writing Halo Days in the corner of his notes. Action turned into a pattern he couldn't ignore. He color-coded runs, green for clean electronics, amber for single hiccups, red for timecode stutters and human symptoms. Red days lined up with the bands he'd circled months earlier. He carried the card like a talisman and felt ridiculous until he didn't. He tried again for a pause, this time bundling electronics glitches. The pacemaker flagged the volunteer's report in his own log. The reply got longer, not kinder. No objective findings, proceed under current risk posture. The volunteer missed 2 shifts. When he came back, his smile was smaller. Still off, he said, sitting slower. Like I'm half a step behind my feet. He'd seen a doctor, workup normal, cause unclear. He stopped driving for a few days because stoplights felt late. None of that made a box. Monitor attendance, a supervisor wrote. Meanwhile, the program's language hardened while people softened around the edges. Integration slides got green checks. Human factors turned into a bullet with a date. A liaison asked if the panel could be pulsed. He said unknown. They wrote under evaluation. He scrubbed the bands off the inside of his eyelids and wished language could move metal. He tried to change the story with rigor. He added blind timing markers to his pendulum runs and brought in a skeptic to initial the page. He kept chain of custody for the panel like it was evidence, not equipment. He wrote "Do not energize within 3 meters of wearables" on a post-it and stuck it to the rack. The post-it went missing. He wrote it again, this time in his notebook, because paper keeps faith when rooms don't. Impact walked up to the gate with a Tupperware. The volunteer's mother had called every number she could find and showed up with cookies like this was a school that understood courtesy. Security met her at the curb, took the sugar, and not the message. He watched from a distance and felt heat in his throat that had nothing to do with bands or rigs. He called a safety officer he trusted from a different program, someone who'd signed off on ejection seat tests and kept sleeping anyway. "If you can't put a headache in a box, it never happened," the officer said. "If there's no board with names, nobody owns stop." He hung up and looked at the panel and the sled and the loops and saw a machine that would run with or without him. So he wrote the blunt memo he knew would be ignored. Symptoms observed, electronics disrupted, pacemaker alert, recommendation suspend human proximate runs pending independent review, risk unknown. He sent it up a chain that bends around accountability. Then he went home, sat at the table with a science project volcano and a ring box full of plans and understood the simplest, ugliest truth. The first human consequence wasn't an injury you could scan. It was a system teaching everyone to stop believing their own bodies. The anonymous package and the proof. It arrived like junk, creased manila, 6 forever stamps, no return. He almost tossed it with the grocery flyers until the weight argued. Inside, a slim plastic sleeve with a sliver nested in foam, a Polaroid of a curved segment under warehouse lights, and a strip of paper with coordinates written in block letters. One line on the back of the photo, "You're measuring the wrong thing, vacuum." He held the sliver with tweezers and felt his pulse step. Same brushed gray, same too-even surface he'd memorized at work. He didn't bring it into the lab. He set it on a ceramic tile on his kitchen counter, turned the lights off like darkness could make it less loud, and stood there long enough for the refrigerator to cycle. Stakes changed shape in that minute. If this matched his ingots and came from outside the program, the fence he thought contained him had holes big enough for a stranger's hand. Someone knew his tests well enough to prod his methods. Someone wanted him outside the system's memory. Action meant building a vacuum the system couldn't sanitize. He drove to a surplus shop with dusty oscilloscopes and bought a benchtop bell jar and a small pump for cash. He signed the form with a fake project name he used to buy screws. Back home, he bolted the jar to plywood-checked seals with alcohol, and set a torsion pendulum he'd built on a dare to himself. Fiber, a tiny bob, a mirror, a cheap laser pointed at a ruler across the room. He clipped the sliver into the bob with paper, no metal, and taped a loop of wire inside the jar wall. The coax ran to a signal source older than he was. Purge, pull down, wait for the pump chatter to settle. He watched the needle creep toward low millibar and let the room get quiet. Baseline, long, patient swings until the light on the ruler found its rhythm. He brought the RF up like a person learning to whisper. The period lengthened by a hair, then another. Field off, the dot walked home. Field on, it walked away. He tuned frequency in slivers, marking the rare bands where the stretch doubled and the troughs where nothing cared. He wrote numbers with a pencil that clicked too loud in the quiet. He He built a micro drop inside the jar with a bead and a foil switch because the full tower wouldn't fit. The impulse on his tiny piezo refused to spike clean. The peak blunted and the tail dragged, the exact wrong shape he'd learned to recognize. He waited for the piezo to warm and drift, cursed, cooled it, ran again, same shape. He wrote near zero instantaneous transfer, extended decay, and underlined near. Heat because heat had humbled him before. A micro thermistor kissed the sliver. A film heater pressed the glass with a path he could account. He fed a small step. The core lagged, then found that shelf like it had a reservation. He watched the outside air probe tick down a tenth across the jar's skin in a room that shouldn't have wind. He reversed it with a duster puff through a chilled nozzle, watched the drop pause on a ledge, then resume. He said nope to an empty garage and walked once around the bench. He stared at the Polaroid until it gave up a detail, a seam that wasn't a seam, a healed tear so smooth a fingernail wouldn't catch, 2 hands in frame for scale, fingers splayed. The floor showed flecks of yellow paint he'd seen in federal warehouses that never got new coats. He flipped it over, blank. He looked at the coordinates and felt the old rumor rise like a temperature. He drove there without telling anyone, past a gas station where coffee tasted like soil. He parked a mile out, walked with a clipboard and a sun hat and let his eyes do the logging. Chainlink on new posts traced a rectangle on graded dirt. A padlock gleamed. Tire tracks cut tight arcs that made no sense for delivery, wide and careful like something heavy had been set down and lifted again. A camera on a pole faced nothing in particular and everything in general. He made notes about imaginary survey points and kept his face bored. He left with his shoulders tight until the fence blurred smaller than worry. Impact landed in the quiet of his kitchen. The vacuum tests offsite had sung the same song as the lab, louder. The fleck wasn't an instrument quirk, the response didn't care about air. It moved with bands like a language, lived in a halo that reached beyond metal. He wrote offsite confirmation on a page he'd promised himself he wouldn't start, then started it anyway. Meanwhile, his phone buzzed with a new login alert from a city he hadn't visited. He changed the password, powered down, pulled the battery like it was a decade earlier, and set it next to the ring box on the counter. He encrypted the fresh logs, printed the vacuum data, and added it to the index he mailed to himself each month. The ink smeared. He reprinted. He tucked the Polaroid inside a cookbook behind a bread recipe he never baked and moved the fleck into the ring box, velvet pressed flat by worry. He considered burning the photo. He didn't. He wrote one more line to himself, if they own the air, I own paper. Then he slept for an hour he didn't remember and woke into a morning that felt like it belonged to someone else. The next move wasn't about data, it was about witnesses. He needed one person to look at the fleck and say the pendulum wasn't lying. He opened his notebook to the page with a name he hadn't spoken in years, circled it, and underlined a single word he hated needing, proof. Surveillance begins, paranoia justified. The first tail hid in plain sight, a white SUV 2 turns back that never passed and never fell away. He told himself it was coincidence until he saw it again the next morning, parked crooked across from the daycare, driver on his phone, eyes up whenever parents looked down. He added 3 unnecessary lefts on the way to work. The SUV made all 3. He parked in a different lot and walked through a different door. The SUV circled once and left. He wrote SUV in his notebook margin and underlined the question mark twice. His neighbor waved over the fence that night and said, cable guys came by, asked if your internet has been weird. He hadn't called. Badges, he asked. Plain, the neighbor said, polite. Inside, his router logs were missing an hour. He power cycled, watched lights blink like a lie detector, and felt watched by plastic. He went to hygiene, new passwords everywhere, longer than they needed to be. He encrypted the archive again, then printed a fresh index and drove it to a storage unit rented under a name close to his, filed under winter coats. He bought a cheap scanner that streaked every 10th line and used it anyway. Streak beats seized. He slid a second index into a library book he lost and paid for, filed under a pseudonym he could say under stress. He hid an SD card in a hollow he'd carved under the garage stairs when he was 16 for fireworks. Email got strange. One message arrived 3 times, then vanished from sent. Another bounced from an address that never bounced. His badge took a full minute to clear a door that usually chirped him through. The guard made a joke about old systems. He smiled and wrote the times next to doors like a tourist logging sunsets. Saturday at his kid's soccer game, he saw the same 2 faces he'd clocked in a parking structure, ball caps, sunglasses, expensive shoes in a muddy field. They didn't watch the kids, they watched the adults. He took his phone out, pretended to photograph clouds, let the lens drift past them, then put it away without pressing the shutter. He clapped at the right moments and didn't remember the score. He moved the ring box 3 times in one night, freezer, attic, back to mundane under a stack of tax documents marked receipts. He added a note to the index, location rotated, checksum verified. He drafted a disclosure letter like a will, what he had, what he tested, where to find the index, who to contact for replication. He named a journalist who didn't burn sources and a lab that still published nulls. He printed 2 copies and sealed them, one in the glove box, one behind paint cans. He didn't mail them, not yet. A sedan idled across from his house at 11 p.m., lights off, engine on. When he stepped onto the porch, it drifted around the corner without headlights like it had rehearsed. A package arrived with a tamper seal he didn't recognize. He opened it with oven mitts just to feel less stupid. A catalog. He laughed once, then he didn't. At work, his badge history showed up in conversations he wasn't in. The supervisor mentioned late nights he hadn't reported. The liaison asked too casually if he needed independent characterization time. He practiced saying, "I can't discuss classified work," in a tone that sounded like a wall. Friends stopped dropping by his bench. The tech reassigned to ballistics waved from a distance and didn't cross the floor. The Allen Key's colleague started carrying his own. Space opened around him like air after a door slams. He duplicated the notebooks on the streaky scanner, bound the copies with twine, and stashed them in a banker's box labeled Holiday Lights in a basement that still used paper ledgers. He swapped the camcorder's SD card for a fresh one, and taped the old one inside a Ziploc under the garage shelf lid. He made a ritual out of small safeguards because rituals keep panic from spilling. Every new line in the index got a small dot in the corner only he knew to look for. The white SUV grew friends, a gray crossover with mismatched tires, a sedan with a dent that never healed. He ran plates once and got out-of-state shells. He stopped running plates. He started running exits in his head. Vehicle break-in, home visit, interview that started polite and migrated. He rehearsed lines in the shower. He timed himself from kitchen table to back fence in socks and in boots. He needed one human who wasn't spooked by weird. He opened the draft letter to the journalist, read it, saved it, and closed it again. He chose a different path, one person with a lab and a spine. He wrote the professor's name on a sticky note and stuck it under the lid of his tackle box, then shut it like he put something dangerous away. The squeeze tightened in small denials. A motion light failed to come on, then worked for the neighbor. His phone flickered green in the group app for a second, then gray again, awake in a drawer somewhere. He stopped believing in glitches. He believed in adversaries who prefer friction over force. Through it all, he kept the archive in motion. One notebook moved every night, bin to shelf, shelf to box, box to bag, so no path stayed true 2 days in a row. He wrote a single line to himself on the inside cover of the newest book, assume compromise, act boring. Then he went to the professor's house at dusk, ring box in his pocket, a sentence in his mouth he hated needing, "I need a witness." The confidant who flips the stakes. He parked 2 houses down from the professor's place and walked the last stretch like a neighbor out for air. The gate groaned. The porch held a wind chime made from broken Allen wrenches. Before he could knock, the door opened. "You look like a bad grant proposal," the professor said, and stepped aside. Inside smelled like flux and tea leaves, piles of journals with dog-eared tabs, a microscope that deserved a pension. He didn't sit. He put the ring box on the table and kept his hand on it like heat might leak out. "I need a sanity check," he said, "not absolution." He laid out the bones, pendulum periods drifting under narrow RF bands, impulse peaks blunting with long tails, thermal shelves, a vacuum replication at home, electronics flinching when bands crossed. No names. No codes, just verbs that refuse to behave. "If you're selling me a perpetual motion machine," the professor said, "I'm going to show you the door and then give you a hug outside it." The line landed soft, then didn't. He opened the ring box. The fleck lay like a mistake you could hold. The professor didn't touch it. He leaned in, eyebrows flattening. "Do you have micrographs?" He slid over a cropped SEM image and a page of period logs in pencil. The professor scanned the lattice hint, the grain that looked too intentional, the hand-drawn bands marked by ear. He exhaled through his nose. "You understand what it implies if this isn't instrumentation." "I've tried to kill it 6 ways," he said. "New rigs, new rooms, nitrogen purge, torsion with a mirror, it keeps coming back." "One test," the professor said. "My lab, independent logging, no samples stay. No files cross a network. If it fails, we never speak of it again. If it holds, you leave with your hair on fire and your mouth closed." He nodded. Fire and silence felt like mercy. They walked into a basement that wore the 80s, peeling paint, safety posters, a clock that ticked too loud. The professor pulled a torsion balance from a cabinet like a violin case, set a bell jar over it, and cleaned glass with a rag that had outlived 7 grants. Baseline first, long, patient swings, a laser dot walking a ruler taped 10 feet away. The professor wrote numbers with a mechanical pencil and didn't look up. He clipped the fleck into a paper carrier on the pan, looped a wire outside the bell, and fed a whisper of RF from a generator he'd rebuilt by hand. The period stretched a hair. Field off, it returned. On it walked out again. The professor toggled at odd intervals to spook correlation. The dot obliged. He moved the frequency by slivers, a shallow valley, then a peak band where the stretch doubled like it recognized a word. He didn't say inertia. He wrote torsion period extension, field band correlated. Heat next, the micro heater kissed the glass, thermistors on the bobbin outside. The core lagged, then found that shelf. The outside probe dipped a whisper. The professor's jaw worked like he was chewing a sentence he didn't want to spit. He checked grounding. He swapped cables. He lifted the bell and reseated it. The shelf returned on command like muscle memory. Again, he said. They did it again. The paper collected numbers like rain. The professor finally swore quiet, like it would disturb the balance. They sat in the kitchen with mugs that tasted like solder. He waited for a speech. The professor gave him weather. If true, it's not garage-level human. If it's black, it's mature. Either way, you're already in someone's notes. I need a witness, he said, not a co-author. I'll sign your notebook, the professor said, with this date and these conditions. Chain of custody in your hand. No digital anything with my name on it. If they come, this house is a museum of broken optics. I won't keep your metal. I won't keep your data. I will keep your sentence. I saw a torsion period extend under narrow bands you mapped by ear. He slid the notebook over. The professor printed his name and wrote one line. Observed, reproducible torsion period extension under externally applied RF at discrete bands, thermal response plateau. He drew a small square in the corner. Witness mark, he said. If anyone forges this, they won't know to fake that. What do I do? He asked. Document chain of custody like a prosecutor, the professor said. Split storage, redact names, never transmit raw, publish method, not metal. Assume every device is a stranger with an agenda. And hear this clearly, special access programs don't litigate the way you think. They move through logistics and loyalty. They won't argue with you, they'll isolate you. He swallowed. If I see the public lab with method, not matter, does that buy time? It buys attention, the professor said. Attention can be a shield or an accelerant, depends on who lights it and when. A small sliver to a journalist is a beacon. A clean protocol to a dozen labs is pressure. Choose pressure. It's harder to disappear a crowd. He nodded. There's also a photo, he said, and slid the Polaroid across. The professor traced the healed seam with a fingertip that didn't touch. I've seen worse forgeries, he said. I've also seen true things that looked wrong. Treat it like rumor. Treat your logs like scripture. They stood at the door. One more thing, the professor said. You're going to be offered help that comes with strings you can't see. Don't take it. Keep your circle boring. Boring people don't leak. They also don't save you. You save yourself by never holding the only copy. He put the ring box back in his pocket, lighter than fear and heavier than proof. The porch light hummed. The wind chime made that small metal joke. If they come, he asked, what should I say? Say you measure, the professor said, and then stop talking. He walked to the car and didn't look back. On the first red light, he wrote a single line on his palm, method, not metal. Then he drove home the long way, counting left turns, while a decision took shape he hadn't wanted to make. He'd widen the circle until it couldn't be erased on a Monday. The sample that shouldn't travel. He machined the fleck under a visor that fogged every 5 minutes. Rule 1, keep it smaller than temptation and thinner than detectors like to notice. Clamped it between sacrificial shims, took off microns with a cutter that whined like a mosquito, and checked thickness against a feeler gauge until the calipers felt like prayer. When it lay on the bench light as lint, he slid it into a mylar sleeve and tucked the sleeve into a greeting card with a dumb joke on the front. Sentiment wouldn't matter. Innocence might. Stakes were ridiculous for something you could lose under a fingernail. If it reached the right hands, a public lab could rebuild his methods and publish without his name on a single page. If it didn't, he just taught someone how he moves. He picked a P.O. box 3 states away, drove at night, paid cash for stamps, and dropped the card at a post office where the clerk still inked the date by hand. 2 days later, the journalist texted from a burner, arrived, then empty. The sleeve was slit so clean it looked like factory work, resealed with glue that smelled like nothing. Somewhere between here and a sorting bin, someone practiced. He cursed, then stopped mailing. He tried analog, dead drop at a crowded park. Mint tin epoxied under a bench slat, magnet strong enough to pull a watch. He watched with a newspaper like it was 1995. 10 minutes before the journalist's window, a man tied his shoe for too long, stood and left with his hands empty. When the journalist arrived, the tin was gone. The city camera flickered twice and steadied. Later, a maintenance report would call it a glitch. He'd run out of belief in glitches. Impact was clarity that felt like a hand on the back of his neck. He moved the remaining sliver back into the ring box, then into a film canister, then back again, like motion itself could keep it safe. He wrote no more mail, no more benches on a page, and drew a box around it. He needed a different door. He switched commodities, not matter, method. He booked a pay-by-the-day sem through a friend of a friend who cleaned the chamber like penance. He dusted a stub with a smear from his sanding paper, so little even a magnetometer would call it noise. One image at modest magnification, enough to show grain and angle, not enough to hand out a blueprint. Back home, he stripped EXIF, cropped scale, and posted to a forum that knew microscopes. The first replies were noise. Then a new account pinned a debunk that read like it was drafted last week. Metamaterial grifters always crop the bar. A fake paper got cited. A lab that never posted suddenly had opinions. He closed the tab and stared at his hands. He wrote to the journalist from a fresh burner instead. Torsion drift under bands A through C, impulse tails stretching, thermal shelves, vacuum replication. No raw numbers, just verbs and enough detail that any honest lab could build a rig for under $100. The reply was blunt: without metal they won't run it. He typed in person, then deleted it, then typed it again. In person. He prepped a handoff like a heist he didn't believe in. Transit hub at noon, too many eyes, too many cameras. He wore a shirt he'd never wear again, a hat that didn't fit, and put the ring box inside a paperback with a broken spine. At the meet point, a man unfolded a map with clean creases. Wrong century, wrong prop. He changed course and kept walking, felt the bone-deep tug to turn around and didn't. Back home, his cloud pinged an access he didn't start. He pulled the hard drive and set it in the freezer like an inside joke that worked better than trust. He stopped trying to slip atoms through hands designed to catch them. So he wrote a protocol a kitchen could follow. String, weight, radio near a dead station, a T-candle, 2 probes, a microhammer from a watch spring. He layered contingencies in the margins, longer string if the drift lives in the noise, rotate the mount if the tail clips, kill power if the camera hiccups. He underlined paper chain of custody like a mantra. Then he wrote one line that changed the game. Meet, bright cafe, breakfast hours, no corners. He sent it at 2:14 a.m. from a device that would die at dawn. If you get this, I'm already gone. He picked a table with windows and told them to bring nothing that beeps. He'd bring a ring box, a protocol, and a sentence he couldn't afford to say twice. Tell it as a story people can feel. He rehearsed the walk, the pocketing, the way the ring box would slide under a napkin like a coin trick. He pictured 2 men by the door ordering separately and standing apart. He pictured a receipt with a timestamp to prove he'd been there. He pictured the mistake he couldn't make: speed. Public pace, he wrote, because speed gets you noticed, and noticed gets you visited. The morning came with hands that shook just enough to annoy him. He dressed like a bad imitation of himself, a shirt that didn't fit, a hat he'd promised to take off. He left the archived copies where his choreography dictated and locked the door without looking back, because looking back is a signal. He walked into a day where the only safe thing left was boring. The ring box rode against his ribs, velvet grinding on cardboard, a sound he'd remember later like a metronome. The transfer and the 36-hour countdown. He emailed at 2:14 a.m. from a device that wouldn't see sunrise. If you get this, I'm already gone. A cafe we both knew, corner table by the windows, 9 sharp. No back booths, no hats, no surprises. Bring nothing that beeps. He'd bring a ring box and a protocol written like a recipe. One sentence at the end that stuck under the ribs: if this goes wrong, tell my kid I tried to make the right thing heavier. We got there early and chose light over comfort. Windows at our backs, a table where secrets go to die. He walked in dressed like a version of himself he barely recognized, shirt fighting his shoulders, the bad hat in his hand, no bag, no laptop, just a dead phone, a wallet, and a ring box cupped like a fragile lie. He ordered coffee and asked for a receipt because paper timestamps don't argue. He set the ring box between the sugar packets and didn't open it. He slid a folded page across his protocol. It read like a kitchen manual: string length, bob mass, radio placement, bands marked by ear, candle, step, microhammer build, contingencies in the margins. If the drift stays in the noise, lengthen string. If the tail clips, rotate the mount. If anything electronic hiccups, kill power and count to 30 before breathing near the rig. At the bottom, chain of custody must be on paper. Film the paper, put a clock in frame. Then he cracked the box. The fleck lay on velvet like lint that knew what it was worth. He lifted the insert to show a second cavity, empty. His mouth made a tired half-smile. Insurance or a problem, he said, depends on your theology. He didn't let us touch it. He slid the entire box across and kept his hand steady. Why us, we asked. Because you're boring, he said. In the right way, you don't sell first draft wonder. You write like people live at the edges of graphs. He sipped coffee, eyes on the street. Tell this as a story, not a paper. People need to feel it. If it's just numbers, they'll file it under magic trick and move on. 2 men walked in separately and stood separately, each ordering like a performance. He saw them, he didn't flinch, he kept talking. He sketched the program's turn from artifact to capability. The fresh tire tracks at coordinates only rumor should know. The phrase inertial management crawling from slides into requisitions. "A flight test is on a board you'll never see," he said. "You'll hear it as folklore first." He warned us about the halo like a person pointing at a cliff. "Certain bands are not your friends," he said. He tapped the protocol where he'd circled them. "Start with pendulums. Pendulums don't lie. Don't bring this near anything you can't afford to lose. Cameras stutter. Time gets weird. It's subtle until it's not." We asked what he wanted if he couldn't pick outcomes. "The archive outliving me," he said, and didn't blink at the word. "A third lab involved, quiet and competent, with a promise that results go public even if nothing happens. My notebook's indexed with shapes, not names. We don't know printed where it matters. And a sentence in your piece that says humans got headaches near miracles." He checked his dead phone out of habit and put it face down. 36 hours, he said, like reading a timer only he could see. Weekend audits would flag anomalies. Doors would open politely or not. His family had moved to a hotel with a fake plumbing emergency. "My house will get a visit," he said. "You'll know because of the note. It's obvious and dumb." We didn't ask. He smiled without humor. "You'll see." We paid in cash and left apart, a minute between footfalls, the ring box heavy in a pocket that suddenly felt zippered shut. The countdown didn't start when he emailed. It started when velvet touched skin. It ticked in engine idles, in badge delays, in the way a door takes a heartbeat longer to latch. We moved like people who have rehearsed. The Fleck went to a room with nothing worth saving plugged in. Chain of custody started on paper, camera in frame, kitchen timer beside a slate. We staged the pendulum, the radio at a dead station, the candle and probes, the microhammer sleeping in a tin. We did not energize, not yet. We wrote the first line of a log, date, time, initials. We took a single photograph of the ring box closed, not open, and sealed it again with a numbered tag. Meanwhile, the world around him began its quiet rearrangement. A neighbor texted about polite men asking polite cable questions. A familiar sedan idled 2 blocks down. His group app icon flicked green for a blink and fell gray again, a phone waking in a drawer and sleeping without dreaming. We kept our promise to move at public pace. He sent one more message from nowhere we could trace. "If it goes dark, publish method, logs later, not origin." We wrote it on paper and taped it to the wall. 36 hours is a long time if you're waiting for a knock, and a short time if you're trying to make a record that can't be erased on Monday. We split tasks, one of us guarding, one of us building the rig, both of us listening for an engine in a cul-de-sac where engines usually nap. He walked back into his life like he hadn't just broken it into parts that could survive a search. We watched the door, watched the clock, and watched the pendulum bob hang still on its string, patient as a hunter. The countdown kept time we couldn't hear. We could feel it. The disappearance, what's real, what's rumor. He missed the first check-in by 10 minutes, not his style. We called, one ring, voicemail, the cheerful robot like a bad joke. We texted safe and watched it sit delivered, never blew. 10 minutes stretched to an hour. The 36-hour window he'd named stopped being a plan and became a clock we couldn't see. We drove his street once, twice, like passing might fix it. A neighbor in a sun hat raked leaves into a perfect stripe, then paused the way people do when they've already told the story 3 times today. The front door sat open a hand's width as if air had opinions. Mail lay face down just inside the slot, edges crisp. In the kitchen, a mug left a coffee ring the size of a quarter. Warm, we pressed a finger and felt nothing but memory. Down the hall, the cheap safe had been treated like a puzzle by someone who hates puzzles. Hinge bent, pry marks deliberate, no wreckage beyond what was needed. Inside, a foam cutout shaped like a ring box stared back empty. On the fridge, a magnet that said "World's Okayest Dad" pinned a handwritten note. If I disappeared because of the alloy. No signature, no flourish, just the sentence he'd promised would be obvious and dumb. We photographed everything the way you talk yourself out of panic, with details. Magnet, note, pry marks, mail on the floor, the coffee ring, the open door gap measured against a ruler pulled from a drawer. We spoke quietly because quiet makes you feel like you're not making it worse. The neighbor stepped to the sidewalk and didn't whisper. 2 men earlier, she said. Nice suits, no badges, said they were from the contractor, needed to check equipment. She frowned at the word equipment like it was a stray. They were polite. A black van had idled at the cul-de-sac the night before. Lights on inside, no logo, diesel that coughed once and settled. They were quiet, she added, and didn't mean it as comfort. We dialed official numbers because procedure is a rope even when there's no anchor. HR said leave of absence twice, like repetition makes it legal. Security wouldn't confirm employment. The non-emergency dispatcher asked about signs of struggle. Defined struggle, we thought, looking at a safe that had been opened by someone who brought the right crowbar to the wrong house. We checked his voicemail again, full. Then on the 3rd call, the greeting reset to default, the kind of change that happens when a phone is awake in hands you don't know. Our group app flashed his icon green for a blink, then gray again, the digital equivalent of a chest rising once in sleep. Rumor grew in the spaces facts refused. One version had him in an interview room with rubber plants and bottled water, answering polite questions about chain of custody and intent. Another had him holed up in a motel off the interstate, watching two channels, waiting for a phrase in a crawl that would tell him which way to run. A third came from a janitor who liked smoke breaks, a badge pulled at midnight, a desk cleared by men who didn't label boxes, a trash can that wasn't heavy until it was. We went to the hotel he'd named in case he needed to vanish with a reason: a plumbing leak, a family weekend, a plumber's van sat crooked. The clerk behind glass shook his head when we asked about a family and a name we didn't repeat. Privacy, he said, reading a script. We left a note under a vending machine with a phrase only he'd recognize: pendulums don't lie. Back at the house, a sedan parked 2 doors down. 2 people with a toolbox knocked on a door like they belonged. Cable work, the neighbor would say later. No truck, no logo, just a box that looked like an alibi. A patrol car rolled slow and kept rolling. We watched a curtain move at the end of the street and pretended we hadn't. We checked the cafe receipt he'd kept. Timestamp matched our meet. He'd come home, made coffee, opened the safe, or watched someone else do it. The ring box cavity in the foam was a clean outline. He'd left the note where strangers had to see it. He'd de-staged the message for us and anyone who cared to read. We tried the back channels that sometimes answer when the front won't. A friend of a friend in contracting said a shipment had been expedited from his facility. Documents, no contents listed, routed to a cousin shell with a friendlier acronym. A lawyer we trust said a hold harmless letter had been drafted with his initials and then filed without a recipient. They're preparing retroactively, she said. That's a tell. We pulled the door closed to a normal angle and left a business card tucked where only a careful sweep would find it. We didn't lock anything. We didn't touch the thermostat. We did one last slow scan for cameras that didn't belong and found only the doorbell lens staring like a dead eye. We'd seen it glitch the night the van idled. Now it showed us our own faces, delayed by a beat. Facts we keep: a note in his hand on his fridge, a safe pried open, a phone that woke up in someone else's pocket, a neighbor who met polite men with no badges, a van that hummed like Patience. Rumors we hold at arm's length: interview rooms, motels, midnight desks. The line between them is thin. We stand on it and do what he asked. We go back to the room with nothing worth saving plugged in. We build the rig, we write the time, and we wait for a call that may never come. The tests we can show and the one we can't. We kept it boring on purpose. Spare room cleared, breakers killed to everything but one clean strip, a paper sign on the door that said do not plug anything in. The ring box sat closed on a folded towel. Chain of custody started before we breathed. Date, time, initials, a kitchen timer, and a slate and frame so a stranger could count along. Baseline first, long pendulum, graphite fiber, aluminum bob. We timed with a photodiode at the bottom of the arc and a counter that ticked crossings. We let it swing until the average stopped moving. Then we swapped the bob for a paper carrier taped to the fleck, no metal fasteners, and set a pocket radio near the enclosure, antenna looped, volume down, tuned between stations to a hiss even a child can recognize. We brought the radio up like we were waking a sleeper. The period lengthened by a fraction outside our error bars. Radio off, the period crept back, on out again. We tuned across the dial by ear and logged where the hiss changed flavor. A shallow valley did nothing. A narrow peak band made the swing go lazy. We filmed the dial of the kitchen timer and frame and our pencil writing times on paper because overlays can lie and paper doesn't. We sanity checked G with a short pendulum and a known length. The calculated value matched the wall within noise. With the fleck in under the same band that made the long pendulum stretch, the period insisted on a different G if you forgot what you were doing. We didn't forget. We wrote effective inertia proxy shift, gravitational field constant presumed unchanged. Words matter when you're pointing at bedrock. Impulse next, we built a microhammer from a watch spring, a jewel bearing, and a foil switch. We calibrated the spike against a steel control. Steel on steel, rude, clean peak, quick decay. Fleck in the path, peak flattened, time under the curve stretched like the punch had to pass through syrup. We flipped order, swapped springs, rotated the mount, changed the bead. The attenuation followed the fleck, not the rig. We added a second accelerometer on the bead itself to watch contact. Approach slope softened, then a tail that refused Maxwell's neatness. We wrote near zero instantaneous transfer, extended impulse duration, then added within resolution because humility is insurance. Heat, 2 probes, microthermistor on the fleck, air probe an inch away. The T-candle warmed a small copper plate under the rig, a step gentle enough to trust. The core temperature lagged, then settled on a shelf that didn't belong to our model. For a handful of seconds, the air probe ticked down a tenth. No fans, no drafts, still air. We flipped the script with a cold puff from a duster held upside down. The drop paused on a ledge, then continued. We logged room temp, humidity, probe serials, and drew the curved shapes with words a stranger could match. We filmed everything the same way, slate and frame, kitchen timer, our hands writing. We photographed the paper at start and end, camera visible, chain of custody visible. The fleck went back into an anti-static sleeve with a numbered tag between runs. Numbers make promises, paper keeps them. Then the test he warned us about, the coupling one. We staged it cautiously, a cleaner loop, ferrites on the cokes, the radio taped so we couldn't slip into a band we hadn't mapped. Lowest setting first. The long pendulum's period began to drift more than before. The camera tally light flickered once. The timecode skipped a frame, then apologized. The photodiode scope retriggered like it hiccuped. Our laptop counting crossings through a USB error and reassigned a port without asking permission. We backed off, reset, tried again. The hiccup repeated closer to the moment the field crossed a threshold we'd circled in pencil. We stopped. We wrote Cascade Risk in block letters. We won't run that configuration again here, not because it's dramatic, but because we can't afford to lose the room. He called it a halo. We call it a boundary. We can show you what we did. Long pendulum logs with bands marked by ear on a printed dial. Photodiode counts, kitchen timer ticks, paper pages with handwritten times a skeptic can add with a calculator. Microhammer traces, control spike V's flattened peak and tail with the fleck present, flipped orders, swapped springs, consistent shape. Thermal curves with the shelf and the tiny air dip that shows up where it shouldn't. Chain of custody sheets with dates, times, initials, tags, camera, and frame. We called an independent lab before we plugged anything else in. They didn't want our numbers, they wanted our method. They'll build their own torsion rig, their own microhammer, their own candle step, traceable probes, blind timing markers, their RF sources. If they see nothing, they'll say nothing. If they see something, they'll publish something and hand out their parts list so a hostile room can try to break it. Meanwhile, we mapped failure as hard as success, bands that did nothing, humidity that swallowed tiny drifts, spring fatigue that masqueraded as signal. We wrote those, too, negative space matters. If this were a trick, the shape would collapse under boredom. It didn't. It got quieter, then returned when we asked the same way. One last thing we won't do, we won't hand you origin. Not because it isn't tempting, but because behavior is the part that survives scrutiny. You can build a string and a weight in an afternoon. You can time a swing with a kitchen timer. You can watch a spike flatten and a shelf appear and decide if your room tells the same story. That's the point. The room is the witness. We're just the hands turning the knobs. Who's building with it, following the procurement smoke? While our rigs cooled, we followed money. Small awards with harmless names flared across contracting portals, impact attenuation substrates, variable density panels, RF-compatible laminates, each tiny on its own, together they rhymed. 3 commands used identical phrasing like a template nobody published. A shell on K Street routed buys to 6 vendors that don't list phones. Invoices referenced a program nickname we'd only heard whispered, never printed. A patent cluster sprouted overnight, tunable inertial response, directional impulse spreading, dynamic mass coupling under M-bias. The verbs matched his notebooks, words nobody outside should know. We asked a filings attorney. Defensive staking, she said. Own the language before the story lands. Meanwhile, a desert range rumor, pilots finishing turns that should have pushed gray, reporting clean vision. Felt like the seat caught me, a crew chief said secondhand. We couldn't verify the tail. We could verify the fuel truck paid by one of the shells. Internal slides shifted from concept to subsystem, with phase flight characterization penciled sooner than physics likes. Safety line items were green checks. Human monitoring was a bullet, not a plan. If the alloy scales, someone's already building with it. Procurement doesn't shout, it leaves footprints. We're stepping in them now, one careful invoice at a time. The human cost and the ethical wall. We kept our eyes on instruments until people forced themselves back into frame. The range volunteer, the one who said the world lagged, started missing mornings. When he showed, he moved like a person stepping off a boat, steadying on nothing. He stopped driving for a week because stoplights felt late. No incident number captured that. The supervisor box said monitor attendance, which is a way to say we don't own this. Stakes weren't theoretical anymore. The tech who rubbed his temples now wore sunglasses under fluorescence. A neurologist told him to hydrate and sleep. He did both, and the headaches learned his schedule. An older engineer lost a word mid-sentence, laughed, then lost the laugh. He wrote his parking level on his hand like a sophomore and called it a joke. He never said the word halo. He wasn't allowed to. Action inside the program took the shape of care without teeth. A wellness memo hit inboxes, mindfulness sessions, break schedules, hydration stations. The same memo greenlit extended exposure blocks to meet integration milestones. He asked for a real safety board by name, charter, members, minutes. The answer came wrapped in a smile. We're aligned with appropriate oversight. He wrote the phrase in his notebook because vagueness needs a habitat. Meanwhile, the volunteer tried to make symptoms into facts. He saw his own doctor, vitals normal, workup normal, notes in a portal, vertigo subjective, nausea intermittent, cause unclear. He called the range medic. The number rang to a desk that didn't pick up, then a mailbox that didn't identify itself. Logs for the session lived somewhere a badge like his couldn't find. If it doesn't live in a log, it doesn't live anywhere that forces a change. He filed another stand down, cleaner this time. No adjectives, just clustering headaches, a pacemaker proximity flag, camera and timecode jitters, the volunteer's report. The reply leaned hard on 4 words, no causal link established. He read the ghost sentence behind it, prove it in a system designed to keep you from proving it. Stakes at home got louder in smaller ways. His kid's teacher called to ask if everything was okay, attention dips, a math worksheet left half finished. He nodded and realized his own attention had turned jagged, lists that didn't complete, sentences that took 2 tries. He started logging his sleep and saw sawteeth. He kept the ring box on the shelf and pretended it wasn't talking. Action turned into the ledger nobody funds, small harms paid by people whose names never make slides. A contractor quit with no notice. Another asked for reassignment and was told no lateral moves. A rumor about hazard pay surfaced in a hallway and vanished before it found paper. Travel orders proliferated. Rotate teams, rotate symptoms. Keep the dwell constant. Change the bodies. We asked a safety officer from a different program, someone who'd signed off on ejection seat tests and still slept. He wouldn't go on record. He offered a sentence instead. If there's no board with names, nobody owns stop, he said. And if the only numbers that count are the ones on a scope, headaches don't exist. He paused. Consent inside a vault is a checkbox, not a conversation. Meanwhile, he built a shadow file labeled something boring. Inside, dates when headaches clustered, which bands were live, how long the panel sang, who left early, which devices hiccuped. He wrote human factors once and crossed it out. He called it setup noise because that's the only label that could survive discovery. The ethical wall rose brick by brick, protect the public while hiding the risks from the public. If the alloy mutes force, you can bring someone home who wouldn't come home otherwise. If the halo bends nerves, you might send someone back into their life half a beat behind. The program needed both truths to be true and one to be quiet. He tried to hold them at once and felt the split in his chest. Action narrowed to what he could control. He added explicit cutoffs to the test cards. Camera hiccup equals stop. Pacemaker ping within 3 meters equals stop. Headache cluster equals stand down. He initialed the lines himself and asked others to do the same. Some did, some smiled and let the ink dry without touching it. He started putting walls between the panel and bodies, distance, shields that were allowed, bands he refused to cross. He got called cautious like it was a diagnosis. Impact walked up to the gate with a Tupperware again. The volunteer's mother brought cookies and a list of symptoms. Security took the sugar, not the list. He watched from the shade and felt the cold anger that arrives when kindness meets a locked door. Inside, the slides moved forward. Outside, a woman held the only board that mattered and nobody read it. He called an ethicist who consults on trauma programs. She wouldn't touch a black hole, but she gave contours. Informed consent needs understanding, voluntariness, and documentation, she said. In a compartment, understanding is partial by design, voluntariness is shaped by careers, and documentation is a risk. You can't meet the bar in the dark. You can only pretend you did. He wrote the sentence down and realized pretending had become a job requirement. Meanwhile, procurement didn't wait. Inertial management subsystem solidified on slides. Integration dates moved left. Human monitoring stayed a bullet. The wellness memo got a fresh banner and the same words. He stood at his bench and watched a capability outrun its ethics by 3 slides and a quarter. So he did the thing that makes you easy to ignore and hard to erase. He wrote a memo in block letters. Symptoms observed, electronics disrupted, pacemaker advisory, recommendation, suspend human proximate runs pending independent review, risk unknown. He sent it into a channel that bends around accountability and copied his own archive by hand until his wrist hurt. He signed the page, then asked a skeptic to sign it too. The volunteer stopped coming. The rumor said the lag stayed. The record said nothing. He added a line to his private index, human cost starts invisible. Then he closed the book and put his hand on the cover like that could keep the pages from being rewritten later. Here's the wall in 1 sentence. The program treated we don't know as a speed bump. The bodies treated it as a cliff. He tried to be the brake and learned how quickly brakes overheat when the grade is steep and the vehicle is funded. Meanwhile, the halo kept doing what it does, tugging at time, flattening spikes, finding shelves in heat, while the people closest to it swallowed headaches and called them long days. He knew then the story wasn't just about physics. It was about whether a system built to hide could ever be trusted to care. Theories versus facts, keeping integrity under pressure. Here's where we slow our hands. What we can say without crossing into fiction fits on fewer lines than anyone wants. Repeatable behavior showed up in rigs boring enough to trust. Torsion periods extended under narrow RF bands. Impulse spikes blunted with long tails when the flex sat in path. Thermal response found a shelf that didn't belong in our model. Limited field conditions nudged electronics and camera timecodes. We kept chain of custody on paper, put clocks in frame, and asked an independent lab to try to break us. The urge to name it moves faster than the data. People want banners, alien lattice, gravity hack, new physics. Naming buys comfort, it also buys error. So we hold a narrow line, describe verbs anyone can test, hold nouns at arm's length, lengthens, flattens, lags, hiccups, those we saw. The rest lives in rooms we haven't earned. Start with matter. One family of explanations says structure does the work, architected phases, defects on purpose, layers tuned to steer waves. Metamaterials already bend sound and light. In that world, a lattice could stretch time of transfer for momentum the way a clever spring spreads force, turning a spike into a smear. Thermal shelves might be phonons finding detours. Heat carriers rooted along paths our probe reads as a pause. The torsion extension wouldn't be mass changing, but effective inertia shifting, because the structure couples to fields in ways textbooks don't spend pages on. Then fields, another family says the halo is the story, an RF-induced network that extends beyond the metal, handing momentum off to space we didn't measure. The near-zero instantaneous transfer becomes less mysterious if impulse migrates into a coupled volume and returns on a schedule our piezo reads as a tail. That still leaves the camera hiccup and the watch that flashed noon, soft hints that whatever we woke isn't polite about where it stops. There's a third path that refuses romance, system error arranged to look interesting. Springs fatigue, rooms breathe, RF sneaks into wires with more enthusiasm than we like to admit. We hunted those, we swapped pendulums, filaments, bearings, we purged with nitrogen, we logged humidity. We moved the fleck from fixture to fixture and watched the shape follow it. Where the effect fell into the noise, we wrote nothing. Where it didn't, we wrote something and left adjectives on the floor. Speculation begins here and we label it. If the lattice is beyond public manufacturing, grain that looks too intent seems that heel like skin, this could be undisclosed human work matured in vaults or non-human manufacture. Both fit the procurement smoke we saw, shells, synchronized phrasing, patent staking verbs no one should share yet. Secrecy isn't proof of aliens, it's proof of secrecy. We also marked the cliff we won't leap from. He wrote second law anomaly once, then deleted it. We share the reflex. When energy accounting looks off, expand the boundary before you declare a law broken. We expanded. The shelf persisted. That earns caution, not headlines. If the plateau is a bookkeeping failure, clean method will expose it. If it's not, clean method is how you tell the world without turning this into faith. Meanwhile, the independent lab is staging under their rules, not ours. Blind timing markers, their own torsion hardware, RF sources with known spurs, calibrated thermometry traceable to standards, a microhammer they can disassemble on camera. They ask for nothing they couldn't buy at retail. They'll publish null if they get null. They'll publish effect if they get effect. Either way, the method leaves with them. We're mapping the negative space as hard as the signal, bands that do nothing, humidity that swallows tiny drifts, string length where the period smears truth, spring constants that mimic tails when they're tired. The more we name those, the smaller the stage for tricks becomes. If this were a conjurer's room, boredom would kill it. Boredom didn't. It made the pattern quieter, then brought it back when the dial crossed the same narrow places. There's a psychological trap in stories like this, confirmation on one side, cynicism on the other. Integrity lives between. We put a skeptic's initials next to runs we cared about. We signed a page that would embarrass us if we were wrong. We wrote unknown in ink. We cut the coupling test short when devices hiccup because data isn't worth a dead room. Hear what theories buy you in the real world. Call it a field halo, and you design distance, shields, cutoffs, and rules that keep nerves out of harm. Call it a lattice effect, and you tune grain, stacking, and thickness, then ask ugly questions about scale, panel, fuselage, seat. Call it non-human, and myth will do the governance for you unless you fight it back to policy. Call it black human tech, and ethics stays outsourced unless sunlight shows up with a clipboard. We keep origin where it belongs, outside our mouths until methods pile high enough that origin matters less than behavior. He asked for that restraint. He also asked for a sentence that admits harm can hide in success. So here it is, even if the physics is elegant, the halo around it is. That's as close to a conclusion as will come without logs from rooms we don't control. One more boundary we draw hard: we won't publish bands that made cameras skip in our room. Not because drama sells, but because we don't want a high school lab bricking a laptop chasing a story. We'll hand those specifics to labs with insurance and boards that meet in daylight. If that slows the myth machine, good. Meanwhile, we're doing the most boring brave thing you can do in a story with sharp edges. We're putting recipes on the table, string lengths, bob masses, timer and frame, radio between stations, candle under copper, microhammer parts you can scrounge, chain of custody you can photocopy. If you're building the rig, start with pendulums. If nothing moves, send us nothing. If something moves, send your logs before your adjectives. This was the moment everything shifted for us, not when a fleck hit velvet, but when we understood that restraint is the only way through. The logs say the rulebook isn't wrong, but it might be missing a chapter. We'll print the margins we can see and leave blank space where honesty demands it. If that frustrates you, good. Frustration is better than fiction. The crisis point, this was the moment everything changed. The envelope looked like junk and weighed like a threat. No logo, just a windowed address and a metered stamp. Inside, a letter from a firm we only hear about when people start speaking softer. Notice of claim regarding misappropriated property, it said, and then the velvet glove turned into a locked fist. Immediate return, preservation of communications, cease further testing, notify counsel. They didn't name the fleck. They named proprietary materials and methods, which is how you say everything without saying anything. The date on the letter had been stamped before our first run finished. Stakes snapped into a single, sharp line. Up until now it was shadows, SUVs that never passed, badges that stalled, cameras that hiccuped. This was a clock with a court date baked in, even if it never reached a courtroom. Whether the claims were air or iron wasn't the point. The letter did what it was built to do: freeze hands, isolate, make you feel alone in a room that just got smaller. We called our counsel, the one who reads threats like weather maps. She exhaled long. If this ties to a compartment, she said, they won't push through discovery. They'll push through logistics. Expect polite visits, not filings. Expect requests that don't sound optional. She told us to move anything that mattered and assume anything networked was already telling someone else about our day. Action meant tightening circles and widening them at the same time. We split the fleck across truss lines that don't intersect, partial here, partial there, seals numbered on paper, initials we can vouch for with faces in daylight. Chain of custody got 3 new branches and a handwriting change you can't fake. Phones off, batteries out, devices quarantined like sick pets. We printed fresh copies of the logs on an old louding jet that barely works because barely works is hard to hack. We sealed a copy of methods with a name that opens it if we can't. We made a bundle that doesn't rely on us being in the room. Meanwhile, the street outside learned patience. A new sedan idled 2 houses down for an hour. The blinds became a metronome. We shifted slats like a lighthouse so nothing looked like a pattern. A friend texted from a number with the right name and the wrong area code. We didn't answer. We wrote down the time of the text on paper and drew a square in the margin, our own witness mark. This was the moment everything changed because silence stopped being a strategy and became a trap. ED told us sunlight can be a shield or a flare. We chose shield. Not a banner headline, not a scream, just a protocol anyone with a string and a radio can follow. We wrote the recipe like a grocery list: graphite fiber, bob mass, string length, radio at a dead station, candle under copper, 2 probes, microhammer parts you can find in a watch repair kit. We added cutoffs in block letters: if the camera hiccups, stop. If a pacemaker pings within 3 meters, stop. If your head hurts, stop. We kept the coupling bands out, not because we're coy, because we don't want to brick someone's life chasing a story. We called the independent lab and told them about the letter. They didn't flinch. They amended the NDA with a clause we needed: results public, null or not. That sentence is armor. We signed it. They'll stage on their bench with their probes on their power with blind markers and a camera pointed at a clock face. If we disappear mid-sentence, method won't. While that moved forward, the pressure tried a different door. Another envelope from the same firm, friendlier words, same fist. A phone call from a voice that wouldn't say a name, interests concerned with safe handling of sensitive materials. He said he'd hate to see our equipment damaged in a surge or a misunderstanding. We said our backups live on paper. He waited for us to fill the silence. We didn't. He closed with, "We'll be in touch," like a weather report you can't outrun. We staged for escalation and for erasure. A 1-page explainer for local law enforcement that says we're not stealing catalytic converters, we're timing pendulums. A sealed envelope addressed to a newsroom that doesn't scare easily, containing chain of custody, parts lists, and our counsel's card. A thumb drive in a locker that can be opened by someone we trust if we don't show up. Sandbags, not heroics. We pressed publish on the protocol at noon. No sizzle, just the recipe, the caveats, the cutoffs, the paper steps. Felt small at first. 2 hours later, it didn't. The university lab, a photo of a graphite fiber under a lamp in 3 lines, baseline stable, radio next. Defense adjacent account called us reckless and posted a thread about security culture that read like a sermon to an empty church. A high school physics teacher asked whether fishing line beats Kevlar. We told him to start with cotton, test his room, and keep a headache log. Impact landed at 2:11 a.m. when a motion light didn't trip and the off-network camera recorded one frame of a shoulder before the feed went black. Morning showed a new scratch on a lock plate, nothing broken, just a test. We swapped screws for stainless. It wouldn't stop anyone. It made us feel like we hadn't only been waiting. We published a second piece that afternoon, logs, not conclusions. Pendulum periods with kitchen timer and frame. Photodiode counts you can add on a calculator. Microhammer traces, control spike versus flatten and tail. Thermal curves with that shelf and the tiny air dip. Chain of custody pages with our messy initials and a slate that shows the date a stranger can read. We redacted bands that made our room click in strange ways. We left in everything you need to call us wrong. The firm sent a reminder. We forwarded it to counsel and pinned the paper copy under a magnet that says, "We will return your call." The magnet made us smile. Small victories count. The phone rang again. Same voice, new phrasing. We prefer coordination to confrontation. We said we prefer boards that meet in daylight. He didn't laugh. Here's the pivot we chose. Widen the circle until it can't be erased without leaving footprints in a dozen labs by Monday. He taught us that with a fleck that spreads impulse over time. Spread the risk, spread the method, spread the accountability. We lined up a short, dull video, hands tying a string, a radio between stations, a candle flickering under copper, a pencil logging times next to a ticking kitchen timer. No narration that promises wonder, just work. In the aftermath, the meaning outgrew the measurements. Lawyers might keep writing, a sedan might idle longer, a friend might stop calling, but a dozen benches could be swinging by sundown. If nothing moves, that truth is public. If something moves, that truth is public too. That's the bargain. He slid a ring box across a table and asked us to make people feel the math without setting the room on fire. We're trying. This is the line: publish enough to force daylight, hold back enough to keep bystanders whole, and accept that once you open the door, the story isn't yours anymore. Resolution: what we did with the sample and the archive. We didn't celebrate, we staged. First, the fleck. It left our hands not to one vault, but to 3 boring places with different threats. A partial went into a heat-sealed sleeve inside a children's book at a relative's house where nobody alphabetizes shelves. Another partial rode in a plain envelope to a small-town law office that files wills and farm deeds, logged in a paper ledger by a clerk who licks envelopes. The third lived in motion, couriered to a campus lab that refuses donor strings, signed for by a tech who wears a watch with a second hand because seconds matter. Chain of custody branched in ink. New lines, new initials, new witness marks, tiny shapes only we know to draw. We filmed the paper each time, clock and frame, our hands visible, the slate showing date and time a stranger could cross-check. We sealed each package with numbered tags and kept the stubs like teeth. Meanwhile, the archive became a creature with copies. The originals stayed on paper, boxed in bankers' cartons labeled stupidly, holiday lights, tax receipts, winter coats stacked where silverfish are more likely than subpoenas. One duplicate set went to a rented storage room whose computer system is a clipboard. Another went to a librarian who remembers when microfiche mattered. She doesn't ask questions when someone pays cash for a locked drawer. A third exists as photographs printed on matte paper because toner outlives trends. We put a checksum on each bundle. Every morning, one of us checks a random page and writes a date with a small mark only we'd look for. We called the independent lab at dusk. They already had a torsion frame on the bench, a radio wrapped in tape across its dial, and a notebook open to a page that read baseline. We told them about the letters. They said they'd stick to their plan: run torsion first, impulse second, thermal third, publish null if they got nothing, something if they got something, hand out a parts list either way. No conclusions, just methods and logs. That sentence, either way, felt like air. For the public side, we packaged what he asked for in the cafe, redacted methods and raw timing pages without names. We posted the parts list anyone could buy at a hardware store: graphite fiber, string lengths, bob masses, a pocket radio tuned between stations, a T-candle, 2 probes, a watch spring, a foil switch, a mirror and ruler if they liked lasers. We showed how to film honesty: kitchen timer and slate and frame, no overlays, pencil on paper in view. We kept the coupling bands out. Not coy, careful. We also opened the index to his private archive the way you open a window an inch. Entry numbers, dates, room temps, instrument serials, a few photographs of meter faces with models visible and backgrounds blurred. Names vanished into shapes. Colleagues became triangles and squares. The professor's witness mark stayed his, a small square in a corner only he knows how to draw. We wrote a rule on the first page and taped a copy inside the box lid. If he returns, he gets the last word. If he asks us to stop, we stop, except for the method already in daylight. Then we built a chore we could live with. Every evening, one of us moves a single piece of the physical chain, book to box, box to drawer, drawer to shelf, so no path repeats 2 nights running. Every morning, the other checks one checksum, writes the date, and draws a tiny shape. It's not paranoia, it's choreography. Boredom is armor. Messages kept arriving. A university lab in Europe sent a photo of a laser dot walking a ruler and 3 words, baseline hold steady. A high school teacher asked if cotton thread would do while they waited for graphite. A safety manager warned that our candle step made him smile and wince and asked for a printable checklist. We sent 1 page, cutoffs, distances, bands to avoid, headache logs, pacemaker warnings, the sentence if the camera hiccups stop. Meanwhile, we wrote 2 letters to people who don't live in forums. One went to the school on the PTA flyers on his counter. It didn't ask for anything. It carried a message he'd recognize if he read it later. The archive is safe, methods are public, no action required. The second went to a legal aid clinic with a paragraph about volunteers and wellness memos in the absence of boards, not for court, for a file. Paper accumulates weight if you let it. We also prepared for silence that doesn't end. 90 days without a verifiable contact from him in a phrase only he uses about a lab detail nobody else knows. And we release the full methods bundle any community college can follow minus the coupling band. If he surfaces, the clock resets. If he asks us to hold, we hold. The record of what we saw stays. The rest waits for his voice. That night, the independent lab sent a single image, a torsion rig under a desk lamp, a radio with tape across the dial, a notebook that read P, baseline. No commentary, just work. We didn't post it. We wrote the time down on paper and slept a little better. We ended the day with unglamorous tasks. We scanned couriers' receipts, stamped envelopes for registered mail, and wrote a simple 1-page explainer for local law enforcement. We're timing pendulums, not stealing power. We put a duplicate of our logs in a safe deposit box that still uses a physical key you can hide in a shoe. We slid the empty ring box, velvet flattened, hinge-tired, into a larger envelope with 3 photographs. The cafe receipt, the Primarked safe, the note under the world's okayest dad magnet. On the flap we wrote, "Open only if you forget why this felt necessary." Resolution here isn't a curtain drop, it's scaffolding. The sample is split and boring on purpose. The archive is duplicated and dull in the right ways. The method is public enough to force daylight and careful enough to keep bystanders whole. The replication is in motion under eyes that don't share our mortgages. And the last word still belongs to the person who made the first risk. If he walks back into the story, he takes the mic. If he doesn't, the record, his and ours, will have to do the talking. The broader meaning why this matters now. The room we tested in looks like a garage sale, not a policy fight. String, a radio between stations, a candle under copper. But that's where this goes. Technology that can mute a punch, bend heat's path, and make inertia feel negotiable isn't just a lab curiosity. It's a fork in the road, power first, or safety alongside it. Start with flight. If inertia can be managed even at the margins, pilots can pull turns that would normally gray their vision and keep talking. Airframes get asked to do dances they weren't allowed to try. That reshapes tactics, training, and what over the horizon means when you get there faster than your body used to let you. It saves lives in cockpits. It also moves the goalposts in conflicts we're already bad at describing out loud. Armor next. If impact stops turning into broken bones on the back face, if you can spread the impulse over time the way our microhammer saw in miniature, soldiers walk away from blasts that would have taken them out of the story. That matters. It also means thresholds change for when someone decides to risk sending them in. History keeps a ledger for every time a new shield arrived and made swords bolder. This isn't different just because the graphs look clean. Heat doesn't stay a footnote. If the alloy really parks thermal energy on a shelf, even briefly, engines can run closer to edges or quieter or cooler where it counts. Power grids shrug at spikes that used to trip them. That sounds like resilience. It's also stealth in its leverage. The first buyers for leverage aren't hospitals. They're commands with budgets and reasons. None of that makes anyone a villain. It does make the rest of us late. Procurement slides already swapped concept for subsystem, and nobody voted on the bullet that turned green next to human factors. That's what he ran into. A system good at moving hardware and worse at holding a room still long enough to ask what a headache means when a camera hiccups at the same second. There's a governance problem hiding inside the physics. Informed consent inside a compartment is a magic trick. Understanding is partial by design. Voluntariness lives next door to careers, and documentation is a risk. Without a safety board with names, stop belongs to whoever feels brave that day. We've watched other fields learn this in public. Aviation rewriting checklists after smoke in a cockpit. Chemicals banning compounds after rivers told the truth. Black programs don't get that sunlight by default. So you end up with a volunteer who can't name his vertigo because the form doesn't have a box for time feeling late. Myth crowds out policy if you let it. Say alien, and half the room reaches for popcorn while the other half reaches for torches. That's why we kept origin at arm's length. Whether the seam that healed was printed in a desert hangar or built in a place we don't have a noun for yet, the decisions about it are human. They belong to boards, contracts, and rules that can be audited, not to campfire stories that make everyone feel brave and nobody safer. There's a quieter reason to care, the ledger no one sees until it's too thick to lift. A capability like this will show up everywhere if it works, in phone cases, in car frames, in turbines, in helmets, in hospital carts if the market makes a lane. If it arrives through vaults, the public gets the benefit without the map of what it cost. That's how you end up calling everything safe, because it ships and most customers don't notice. The people who do notice, workers, testers, the first wave of adopters, end up with headaches called long days. So here's a boring map that matters. Document human exposure with the same rigor you give telemetry. Separate integration schedules from any work that puts a person near a panel. Write cutoffs into contracts. Camera hiccup equals stop. Pacemaker ping equals stop, and attach names to the enforcement. Fund replication outside supply chains that need a win. Publish methods that a hostile room can follow, including the conditions where nothing happens. Require post-exposure monitoring that doesn't depend on an inbox nobody checks. And when a program uses phrases like inertial management, bake an ethics board into the plan the way you bake in power budgets, non-optional, with authority. There's also a cultural shift we owe ourselves. We don't know has to become a full sentence again. Not a stall, not a smirk, an admission that buys time to get the method right and the people safer. We tried to smuggle that sentence into a room that edits verbs into nouns. Our job is to say it in daylight and then show the log that earns it. We keep thinking about that ring box. It felt like the whole story could fit in your palm. It can't. The fleck is a seed. The tree is every lab that tries to replicate honestly, every safety officer who refuses to let a wellness memo stand in for a board, every procurement officer who writes monitoring into line items, every journalist who refuses to confuse effect with origin, every citizen who understands that secrecy is a tool, not a value. You don't need to know where a scene came from to insist on guardrails that keep people whole. And if you're the person about to build the rig in your garage or your classroom, the map includes you. Put a kitchen timer in a slate and frame. Keep a headache log. Tell anyone with a pacemaker to leave the room. Start with pendulums. If nothing moves, that's data. If something moves, that's pressure on us, on labs, on the culture that decides how fast to drive after someone invents better brakes. He wanted this told as a story people could feel. Not because numbers don't matter, but because stories move people who write rules. The broader meaning is that a material might be non-human. It's that our choices about it will be. We get to pick how much daylight, how much risk, and who carries it. We get to decide if the first line of the ledger is a capability or a contract clause that says stop means stop, written by someone you can call on a Tuesday. The rest is physics, and the physics will do what it does whether we behave like grown-ups or not. He risked his life to prove a material could rewrite how force, heat, and motion behave, and the silence around it speaks louder than any headline. If you want the raw logs and the exact method to test this yourself, watch the next video linked here. Subscribe to follow the independent replication, the safety fight, and the procurement trail. We'll share what we can when we can. Turn on alerts, and if you build the rig, send your logs. We keep receipts.